Hey guys, Zack Thurman here from the Fly Shop. Today I'm going to be tying my Balanced Swimming Leech. It's one of my Stillwater patterns based off the original swimming leech. I came up with this fly mainly because the Balanced Leech has been so popular in our area, whether it's been Pyramid Lake or Upper Klamath Lake. They've really taken off, and as all the jig flies have. So I decided to turn my swimming leech into a balanced version. For the hook, I use Umpqua's XC400BL. This hook's been great for us. It's held up to those 20 pounders over on Pyramid, and super sharp and strong. And once the fish get stuck, they don't get off. So the first step, I was going to start by tying some thread onto the hook shank. And you don't need to go too crazy yet with the thread. Because you're going to be tying on the balance leech pin, and the pin is actually a beading pin. You can get it at a craft store, Super Walmart, any of those places. The pin itself is longer than the hook shank, so you have to actually cut the pin to shorten it up so it doesn't extend past the bend of the hook. So I just take some pliers and just come in here and be careful not to get yourself in the eye and just trim it down a little bit. Now you can see it's a little shorter. Once you do that, you're going to slide on your tungsten bead. I use 30 seconds for a size number 8. This is size number 8. And just slide that on. And one thing you want to do, some of the pins, sometimes the head of the pin is not as wide and the bead will actually slide over it. So you just want to make sure before you tie this thing on that the bead doesn't slide over it. And right there, it's sticking. So I'm just going to take the beading pin and I'm going to tie this on to the hook shank, the jig hook. Wrap it under a few times, figure 8. And I'm just going to cover this pin completely with thread. One trick is right here where you cut the pin. Sometimes that can nick your thread and break your thread, so you just want to be careful when you come back behind the pin. And for the most part, that's pretty sturdy, but I usually take some Zap-A-Gap brush on and just coat that. A little more durability. Next step is going to be tying in the tail. I like using J. Fair's Premium Marabou from Sierra Stream and Mountain in Chico. Good quality Marabou, the colors are right. And I use it pretty much on all my lake flies where I have a Marabou tail. When you're selecting the Marabou for the tail, you kind of got this junk stuff down here in the bottom. So what I'll do is I'll pull that stuff off, get it out of the way. And your prime tail material is kind of right in here in this midsection. This stuff's a little too fine, doesn't quite move as well in the water. But this fluffier stuff right here is the stuff that really pulsates and gives the fly a good action. So I'm going to pull a pinch of that off. And I like longer tails myself, so I'll go at least as long as the shank of the fly. And I'm just going to come in here and tie that in. And the longer tail just gives you more movement. And one thing with the longer tail too is if you want, you can always come in and pinch it shorter too. But you can't add to it. So once that's in, cut off the excess, do a couple of wraps so it's covered up. So the next step is building the body, and for the body I use J. Fair's translucent swimming hackle. I'm actually use this in 2 lengths. I use it in the medium, and then I'm going to use it in the long. And the long is actually kind of the hackle, if you think of like a normal woolly bugger. The medium's the chenille, and the long's going to be the hackle. I'm going to tie in the medium first. And then I'm going to tie in the long. Once I get those moved in, I'm just going to move the thread up towards the bead so it's out of your way. And now I'm going to go ahead and wrap these two materials and build the body. First, you're going to wrap the medium. And you kind of have to pull, these materials are pretty flexible, so they'll like to wrap up on themselves or on the threads. So you kind of have to play with them a little bit to get it started. But once you get it started, then it's pretty easy sailing. And I just like to pull back the fibers as I'm wrapping forward. At the end, we're going to brush all this out, and which will help pull out the fibers. But when you're wrapping it forward like this, it just makes it a little easier. We'll come back here. All right, cut that out of there. So now I'm going to wrap the long, and unlike the short, you're only going to do about 4 or 5 wraps. And that kind of gives it the two-tone as you would some of the other buggers and leeches out there. The black and burgundy version is probably the most popular, but I also, when the water's clear or in the summertime when the damsels are coming off, I also like the olives and the olive brown. Cut that out of there. So it doesn't look like much yet for the body, but it will. So I'm going to go ahead and whip finish. Okay, so get that out of there. So now you can see the long's quite a bit longer than the medium. So what I do is I just come in and I just trim the long so it's just a tad longer than the medium. Otherwise it just gets it's just a little too much, a little too overdressed. And to brush this out, you can use a dubbing brush. What I've found is just a piece of Velcro. Works pretty good. Some of the dubbing brushes grab too much, and it'll want to pull the material out. But you can see as I'm brushing this out, it's really fluffing out the material, and it's breaking apart all the fibers, and that's what gives you all the movement in the water. This material is so soft that once it gets wet and it's brushed out, and even after you catch like a fish, it moves just like crazy. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's definitely has more movement than like Angora goat or simi seal. You just come, and you can brush it as much or as little as you want. There's still a few fibers. Sometimes you get a few fibers like right in here that are tricky, so you got to kind of hold them. You can also come in like this and brush it out. You can, some of these, like after you brush it, like that one right there, you can see how it's quite a bit longer. So you can just come back in and just trim them. That's the nice thing about this material, unlike like a hackle or a lot of the other materials. You can come in and trim it and get it to look the way you want. Whereas most natural materials you can't. And that's the Balanced Swimming Leech.